This is the Brabant Bulletin, brought to you by the European Brabant Registry of America, where people, passion, and preservation are our mission. This is part one of a two-part series on the Great Horse, the origins and evolution of the ancient Brabant. Though a formal census on the breed has not been conducted in recent years, a survey of the stud book in Belgium reveals just 5,000 purebred living there today. And there are less than 50 purebred European Brabants, 93.75% traceable and verifiable bloodlines, registered with the European Brabant Registry in North America. To better understand and appreciate the need to preserve this rare draft horse, we'd like to share their story with you. The modern-day European Brabant, pronounced Brabant, I'm sure that's controversial to some, is a heavy horse with ancient origins that's believed to be one of the oldest draft horse breeds in the world. Its evolution and origin, phenotype, and name is long and multi-layered. Our sources range from historical documents and books in a myriad of languages, to articles in registry archives in several countries. Given most sources were in Latin, Dutch, French, and Old English, we relied on academic translations where possible and resorted to using Google Translate when those weren't available. We also feel it's important to apologize upfront to the incredible people of Northwest Europe whose stories are so closely intertwined with this horse. The myriad of early settlements and tribes from Germanic to Celtic were vast and nuanced, and some, mainly the Romans, yeah, we're looking at you, Julius Caesar, lumped them together when these communities couldn't be more different. It's kind of like the thousands of culturally distinct indigenous peoples first encountered by Europeans, who wrongly labeled them all Indians. Alas, we will be referencing some archaic terms and hope you won't judge us too harshly. Like all horses found in Europe, the Brabant's ancestors migrated to North America, across the Eurasian steppe, and eventually found their way to Northwest Europe. It's said their progenitors grazed in the hilly Ardennes forest that stretched 4,300 square miles from France to Germany before they made their way to the alluvial plains of the Rhine River Delta in what's today the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Fun fact: historians maintain the proto-heavy horse evolved from the Solutrean horse circa 50,000 BC. Remains of the Paleolithic 17,000-year-old Solutre horse were found in modern-day Burgundy, France in the 1800s. Though extinct today, the Solutre horse lives on as the progenitor to the Ardennes, Brabant, Boulognese, Breton, and Percheron heavy horses. These ancient horses developed distinct characteristics to survive the region's climate and terrain. They became sturdy little horses, ponies by today's standards, standing between 13 and 14 hands tall, with broad hooves, thick bones, compact bodies, short, wide backs, short legs, and heavy, double-muscled croups. Their dense coats, double manes, and thick tails protected against extreme weather, and their ability to sustain on little food made them hardy survivors. As these stout, formidable horses continued to evolve, so too did human civilizations of the region. People communalized, developed languages, began farming, discovered the wheel, built houses, and made pottery. I'm pretty sure grilled cheeses were probably invented around this time too. Yes, that's the abridged version of human history for the sake of expediency because, let's face it, we're here for horse stories. According to historian and author Dr. M.E. Marion, evidence of early farm settlements in the Rhine River Delta, also commonly referred to as the lowlands, began around 4500 BC. From that time through the first millennium BCE, the people and horses of the region mingled, and the horses went from being a food source to being domesticated partners. Horses were used for farming, packing, riding, and warring. Grave goods unearthed by archaeologists from the Iron Age chieftain's burial contained snaffle bits and axle caps from war chariots, which are currently on display at the Dutch Museum, Het Volkov, in Nijmegen. Since people love names and labels, we must address both head-on as they correlate with the European Brabant's history. Tribes of Celtic peoples known for their agricultural prowess, dotted across modern-day France, through the Rhine River Delta into parts of Germany. They were collectively referred to as Gauls, but each tribe had its own unique origins, cultures, chieftains, and horses. The Belgae, pronounced Belgi by some and Belgae by others, were a conglomerate of tribes. Among them were very accomplished horsemen who resided in the lowlands, whose Proto-Celtic names roughly translated to the people who swell with anger. Now here's where one outsider's perspective, for better or worse, forever shaped modern-day terminology. Upon the Roman conquest of northern Gaul in 57 BC, Julius Caesar divided the region into three parts: Celtica, Belgica, and Germania. Yep, you guessed it. Belgae, Belgica, Belgian, the Belgian draft horse. Eureka, we're done. Just kidding. Julius Caesar wrote extensively about the Belgae and their amazing horses after the conquest, noting their horses as most willing and untiring workers, and he recommended their acquisition to the heavy cavalry. By some accounts, it said the Roman cavalry, fastidious horse breeders, indeed took some of the stout, powerful horses from the now Latinized Gallica Belgica to breed strength into their stock and to pull supply carts for the roving legions. Likewise, it's purported the Belgians used some of the Roman legion's taller Italian stallions, no, not Rocky, to increase the height of their own mounts. Through the intervention of a man's selective breeding, the horses of the Brabant, or marshy region, began to take shape. Fun fact, Brabant is derived from the Old High German words Braha and Bont. The word Braha, and the past tense verb break, means newly broken land, and the word Bont means region. Between continuous trade and migration, other horses were brought in the mix and influenced the Belgians' horse stock. Vice versa, too. These hard-working, cold-blooded horses made their way into Scandinavia, Britain, and other far more afield parts of the world. As a quick aside, a historic site dating from the mid-2nd century BC, excavated in southeast United Kingdom, demonstrates evidence of the horse-worshipping Belgic culture in the area. Whether through migration, conquest, or trade, they left their mark both figuratively and literally. A 374 by 130-foot horse illustration carved into the Oxfordshire hillside dates back to as early as 50 BC. One might theorize that Belgae people brought their beloved horses with them, thereby influencing the horses of the British Isles. After the Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, the geographical home of the heavy horse did not change, but the area's man-made borders morphed into ever-changing dynasties, kingdoms, and empires over the next 1,000 years. Boundary lines were drawn and redrawn, and countries, counties, and duchies were established. While horses of that era were not known as breeds as much as types, the proto-draft horse of the lowlands adopted informal breed names based on areas in which they resided. For instance, the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire in 800 AD gave rise to the County of Flanders in 862 and the Duchy of Brabant in 1183 AD. Thereafter, the horses were referred to as the Flanders or Flemish horse and the Brabant horse, respectively. And at the same time, there was the Ardennes horse, so named for the Ardennes region, the Comtois of the Franche-Comté region, and the Trait du Nord of the county of Hainaut. That's pronounced Hainaut. Regardless of the names humans labeled them, they were all derived from the same ancestral proto-heavy horse. Each region continued to selectively breed their horses to best suit their purposes and needs. With the introduction of the heavy pulling collar in the 9th century, and the subsequent innovations in plows, harnesses, and horseshoes, these now draft horses were bred heavier for maximum pulling power. The Flanders horse of the lowlands gained much notoriety during the early medieval period, a time best known for chivalry and knighthood. The Flanders horse, sometimes called the Flemish horse, stood between 14.2 and 15 hands and was a stoutly built, strong-backed horse that was coveted by knights throughout Christendom for their ability to carry heavy loads over great distances. It's believed the Flanders horse was crossed with the hot-blooded Spanish horses to create the ideal war horse referred to as a destrier. These warm bloods had the spirit and stamina of their hot-blooded progenitors and the level-headedness and strength of the cold-blooded ones. They could easily convey men and armor weighing in excess of 400 pounds, and the fact that they stood around 15 hands at this time made them easily mountable from the ground, a necessity for any knight who found themselves unseated on the battlefield. The term breed is a relatively modern concept, so just to reiterate, during this period, horses were mainly referred to by their working purpose and not necessarily by distinct breeds per se. They were the destriers, as well as the chargers, hackneys, sumpters, palfreys, rounceys, and coursers. Think of these classifications of horses the same way we classify our cars today. You've got the truck, meant for hauling heavy loads and pulling. You've got the sedan, which is great for economical everyday driving. Then there's the sports car that gets you anywhere, fast. Written accounts of breeds and crossbreeds used for each purpose are somewhat limited to law codes, receipts, letters, and breeding records of the time. During this period, the Flanders horse was essentially a medieval truck that was mainly used as a pack and draft animal. There are historic references that show the Great Horse of Flanders and Brabant were imported to England for breeding purposes. As noted in Sir Walter Gilbey's The Great Horse, published in 1899, I remember when that came out, he writes that somewhere between 1199 and 1216 AD, England's King John imported 100 Brabant stallions, which were then crossed with English lowland mares, the SUV of the day, to develop what was to become the renowned Shire draft horse, or semi-equivalent. Consequently, these horses were used to breed destrier war horses, and were known by the English as their own great horse. So here's an interesting side story we discovered that we'd like to share with you really quick. An engineer from Brabant was appointed by King Henry IV of France in 1599 to work on a land reclamation project in
Marais Poitevin.
Excuse me. Anyway, the marshlands of Poitou in France. The job required a lot of specialized labor, so the engineer, Humphrey Bradley, recruited skilled workers from the Low Countries who brought their working horses with them. Their heavy horses were crossed with the local stock to create the Poitevin horse. Later, these draft horses were crossed with the large Baudet du Poitou donkeys to create some of the most sought-after mules in the world. In the 1700s, Brabant broodmares were imported once again to England and bred back to Shire stallions to improve the bloodlines. Also, of note in the 170s, John Patterson, the 6th Duke of Hamilton and the Marquess of Clydesdale, imported Flemish stallions to Scotland and bred native Lanarkshire mares to establish the famed Clydesdale draft horse, the very same ones made famous by the beer company, Budweiser. Coincidentally, Clydesdale is also the name that every non-horse person refers to any draft horse. Insert forehead slap here, and nobody ever said it had to be your forehead. As widely used for breeding as they were in the medieval period, and the progenitor of so many draft horse breeds, it's easy to see how the Flemish Brabant horse earned the moniker father of all draft horses. And that, dear listeners, is where I will leave you for now. Be sure to like and subscribe to the Brabant Bulletin podcast. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you got time, visit www.europeanbrabant.com too. We've got a lot more to share in part 2, so stay tuned. Until next time, don't forget that to ride a Brabant is to fly without wings.